You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there, I'm Philip Heighton, and today is Friday, July 14th, 2023.
6.
So we usually record Procurement 6 a couple of days before it's published to make sure we're keeping it right up to date. But this week, I'm actually on holiday in a pretty far-flung location with no Wi-Fi, and while I'm sure that's giving me some anxiety being away from everything and being unconnected, I thought I'd pre-record this week's episode, so I hope you can forgive me for that. Okay, so now on to this week's tip of the week. So this holiday, it took a lot of planning, and in typical procurement style, I quoted what I found to be 100% plus markups on a private tour, so I reverse engineered it and was able to build it myself. Now, this planning is something that I like to do for trips like this, but in my day jobs as a practitioner, I often felt that I didn't have time to plan really anything. It was just go, 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 go. And this was particularly the case for negotiations. So this week's tip of the week then is to always make sure that you're baking time into your calendar to plan and to consider different scenarios in advance of important negotiations. Making things up in the moment, and that's what I did a lot of times when I was negotiating, may lead to the occasional successes, but it definitely isn't the answer if you want to maximize your impact every single time.
5.
This week on the podcast, I was joined by Neha Kumar to take a dive into the world of construction procurement. I asked Neha to share the different models that procurement typically has to be able to support when it comes to supporting new construction projects.
There are 2 or 3, right? There's the general contractor model where you just give everything to a general contractor and they go ahead and do what they need to do, right? Then there is what I like to call construction management, which is where the entire team that's involved in a project is intimately involved from the beginning stages. And then there's also the design, bid, build, where there is a designer, then you go out to bid, and then you build. Each one of them have their pros and cons. We do get involved in all 3. And honestly, it all depends on our collaboration with our real estate clients, right? When they decide to actually get us engaged. And that's when we can play the biggest impact. I often say that the construction management methodology works best because you're not only getting procurement involved in the very beginning, you're also getting some of your consultants that are going to support you throughout the project involved in the beginning. So what I mean by that is if we have a contractor that's going to do the actual build out involved from the beginning stages, they're working with the architects, the engineers, everyone involved in the design to come up with the best design possible so that we stick to the schedules and the expenses involved with that project.
4.
Kelly Banner and I had the opportunity to facilitate the first morning main stage sessions at the recent ProcureCon IT event in Boston. And so I thought I'd share 3 different observations that I made from those first few sessions. First of all, cost pressures are definitely real, and inflation has impacted SaaS like other categories. Visibility into your SaaS spend is key as it allows you to be proactive and spot red flags versus being reactive. Consider agreements as well and contracts that tie pricing to an index, but also have a cap so that your CIO knows their maximum exposure. So for example, a 5% cap on an annual cost increase, but the real amount is tied to an index. And so you know that 5% is going to be the top that you will actually face. Another issue is cybersecurity we heard a lot about. It's increasingly important and suppliers can no longer dodge this issue of business continuity plans or disaster recovery plans relating to cyber and cyber insurance. However, this is going to increase the cost of your suppliers. And so there were a lot of discussions around how it's actually important for the buyer, you, to actually be prepared to pick up the bill of additional things like cyber insurance with your providers. Finally, IT procurement professionals are really well positioned to help the rest of the business explore and pilot generative AI applications and really be the quarterback, bringing the relevant stakeholders together to ensure that any pilots that are done with info security in mind.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
We frequently discuss how, in survey after survey, procurement leaders lament their maturity level and the way that they're perceived within the business, as opposed to, for example, other functions that we look up to, including finance. But guess what? It isn't just procurement that thinks that way. In fact, a large survey just released by EY called the 2023 Global EY DNA of the CFO report, CFOs feel the same, with just 16% of finance leaders surveyed describing their finance functions as delivering best-in-class performance. That's just 16%. This report is a really fascinating read if you want to get to know the CFO in more detail. Also of note is a challenge that CFOs are actually finding right now in attempting to reduce costs, which we know very well, but also doing so by cutting funding to a strategic initiative. So anything we can do to help CFOs continue to fund those strategic initiatives is one way that we can really build some collaboration with the finance office. I'd highly encourage you to give the report a read, and I've linked to it in the show notes of today's episode.
2.
No tech should be forever. Those are the wise words of procurement tech analyst Michael Lamoureux on a recent blog post that he posted on his Sourcing Innovations blog. To that extent, Michael suggests that we should be ensuring that a technology purchase does not lock you in for the long term, and that in any RFP you should be looking out for potential partners that do things like has 100% self-serve full data export capability in case you need to get the data out, has extensive self-serve configuration in terms of users, access, process flows, approval flows, terminology templates, so you can adapt it as your processes change, even if that might be minor or even moderate ways, has a fully open API, and is accompanied by extensive documentation and educational resources and partner training. I'll link to Michael's full blog post in today's episode show notes.
1.
Do you have a role to play in buying contingent labor or services? Well, on July 27th, we'll be joined on our AOP Live webinar series by Brian Salkowski, the Chief Operating Officer at Guidant Global, to share a live case study based on one company's experience with expanding their external talent management program. The case study company that we'll feature faced this challenge heads on. They'd already implemented a successful contingent workforce program, but were considering expanding into services procurement. Their goal was to uncover opportunities to elevate services procurement without disrupting the internal team or the stakeholders that rely upon that source of talent. To register to join or to gain access to the webinar recording, you can go to artofprocurement.com/calendar, where you'll also find all the other events that we have open for registration.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.